She lived in Paris, interacting with Picasso and Braque, and she translated Cubist principles into literature, breaking linear time and reassembling language like an abstract painting. And philosophy of perception, Stein's works challenge how we construct meaning from language, echoing broader 20th century philosophical concepts. When we look at Cubism and the idea of the strategic reassembling, we before that we should look at the painting which was portrayed by Pablo Picasso, Gertrude Stein's painting. And if you look at this, so what is a cubist painting like? So if we see the painting, in this painting, the face of Gertrude Stein is quite abstract, and this foreshadows, it's foreshowing cubism. It's flat, it's rigid, it looks like a sculpture. So it is almost like a mask, and it's simplified. So it lacks the traditional realism. And also this particular painting is suggestive of the way she sits, the way she is portrayed here, showcases her authoritative presence, her power, and she is elegantly, looking slightly off center. So if we look at this painting and how Pablo Picasso had in how she was influenced by the Cubist movement. If we look at the Cubist movement, Cubism, Cubist art, Cubism in art, it's more about the broken objects into geometric patterns, and more so it's a formation of multiple perspective. And Stein features this element into her language, and she uses this to create new meanings in her writing. Now, Stein was the avant-garde and the gender non-conformity. Now, when we look at Stein and her explorations of identity and selfhood, so like Eliot, Stein was also in the process of becoming, the desire to become, the desire to situate herself as a writer. Um, and if we look at Stein's, saloons, they played a very pivotal role, and these saloons were more so like the meeting point of the intellectuals. And the notable attendees in the saloon were Pablo Picasso, Henry Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, Eliot, Joyce, Georges Braque, and many more. And even Alice B. Toklas, with whom she was in a long relationship. And this salon, or this, this particular, like meeting point, also was enabled, fostering modernist literature and the avant-garde art. So Stein's position in the avant-garde community was highly influenced by her non-conformist lifestyle. So when we look at the kind of relationship that she shared with, Toklas, is also quite interesting. She added to the changing conversation about gender and sexuality by supporting and advocating for alternative lifestyles during a period when such identities were actually ignored. Though Paris was quite known for the queer subculture, and it was quite known for that. Despite that, coming out during that time was not a regular thing. In terms of gender and sexuality, as well as creative traditions, her life and work represented a rebellion against conventional roles and expectations. In promoting freedom of expression in both life and art, she was a trailblazer. Now, the avant-garde writing, non-linear narratives, fragmented syntax, and disruptions of grammar and meaning. Jossa, the pleasure in reading from the bliss in reading. Text of pleasure. What is it? And how is this text of pleasure different from the text of bliss? The text that contents Phil grants euphoria, the text that comes from culture and does not break with it, is linked to a comfortable practice of reading, is the text of pleasure. And the text of bliss is the text that imposes a state of loss, the text that discomforts, perhaps to the point of a certain boredom, unsettles the reader's historical, cultural, psychological assumptions, the consistency of his taste, values, memories, and brings to a crisis his relation with language. Rullabad further adds, a writer is not someone who expresses his thoughts, his passion, or his imagination in sentences, but someone who thinks sentences. A sentence thinker. So a writer is a sentence thinker. And how does this, fits well in the case of Gertrude Stein? So he's not altogether a thinker and not altogether a sentence parser. Gertrude Stein's engagement with the sentence in how to write is basically a 1931 collection of essays. She could be read as a text of bliss. She here unsettles historical and cultural assumptions about the sentence and prompts a crisis in the traditional view of sentence. When we look at the key ideas in how to write, it is more about repetition as creation. It's like breaking. She advocates the breaking of the syntax and grammar. It's more circular or circumlocutory, fluid, associative, mimicking spoken language. And writing is a process. Writing is a process, not a product. It moves beyond art to linguistic reality. It carries the stream of consciousness. It deconstructs the linguistic, structures and creates a play for language. When we look at The Tender Buttons of Gertrude Stein, which was published in 1914. This is highly an experimental form of poetry. It contains three sections: objects, food, and rooms. And each of them focuses on the everyday subjects with a radical approach that challenges traditional narrative and structure. And this also exemplifies the modernism's preoccupation with perception, abstraction, and the subjective experience of reality. Now, we can look at this: a long dress. This is in the first, this piece appears in the first section under objects. A long dress. What is the current that makes machinery, that makes it crackle? What is the current that presents a long line and a necessary waste? What is the current? What is the wind? What is it? Where is the serene length? It is there, and a place, and a dark place is not a dark place. Only a white and red are black. Only a yellow and green are blue. A pink is scarlet. A bow is every color. A line distinguishes it. A line just distinguishes it. Now, if we look at this structure, of course, at the instantly it sounds. What is that current? It's more interrogative. There has to be punctuation, but she overrules, the forms, the linear forms of of communication. She does not follow the punctuation. And what does she say here? In her 1935 talk, Poetry and Grammar, she explains her thoughts and beliefs regarding punctuation. She claims that the question, exclamation, and quotation marks are superfluous and uninteresting, since their purposes are clear from the way a sentence is put together. She values writing over punctuation rules. Now we can also see this how she does so. So she goes on and on. So there's a continuity. There's a continuity, and this continuity is not a linear one. So it's like going back and forth. What is the current that makes machinery, that makes it crackle? So again, it's going back, that makes it crackle. What is the current that presents a long line and a necessary waste? What is the current? Again, back. What is the wind? What is it? So rather, this is what she's trying to say, that why should why should a particular structure claim that it is a question? It should be put, I mean, the form itself should make it clear that it is put that way. So these punctuation marks are unnecessary when writing. What is the use if you do not know that a question is a question? What is the use of its being a question? The same thing is true of exclamation, and the same thing is true of a quotation. All right. Now we take up another one here. This is again from the tender buttons. The sight of a reason, the same sight slighter, the sight of a simpler negative answer, the same source sounder, the intention to wishing, the same splendor, the same furniture. A cause and no curve, a cause and loud enough, a cause and extra, a loud clash, and an extra wagon, a sign of extra, a sack, a small sack, and an established color and cunning, a slender gray and no ribbon. This means a loss, a great loss, a restitution. Now, if you look at the structure here, the sight of a reason, the same sight slighter, the sight of a simpler negative answer, the same source sounder, the intention to wishing, the same splendor, the same furniture. It is composed of discrete phrases, and all these phrases, the sight of a reason, a phrase, the sight, the same sight slighter, phrase, the sight of a simpler negative answer. All of these are linked by comma. Each phrase. So the comma, instead of becoming a pause, a smaller pause, turns out to be a linker here. It turns out to be a linking, a linking device here. So each phrase repeats. So it's basically it's hooking. It's hooking all these phrases. It's hooking the phrases together. Each phrase repeats a word from the previous phrase, and the effect is that of ending and beginning between each phrase. So we see this ending and beginning, ending and beginning. And the commas here act as periods as well. So the sight of a reason as a period, the sight, the same sight lighter as a period, but at the same time, it's not. At the same time, it turns out to be as a linking device. So putting all of these phrases, like putting it in loops together so as to get the to get the broader idea. So here, actually, what do we see here? There's more of a play of words. It's a play of words, and how she distorts, disrupts the grammar and the syntax and makes it as a non-linear narrative. You can take this. We So comma serves as a rhythm and repetition here. Now, when we look at the other, the following um, excerpt, poetic piece. Around the size is that small, inside the stem that is the middle, besides the remains that are praying, inside the between that is turning. All the region is measuring and melting is exaggerating. What is she doing here? So you see, you look at it, again, around the size that is small, around, inside, besides, inside, and that's how, so this is composed of prepositional phrases. So again, she begins with the prepositional phrases. So these are not, complete sentence structures. So again, the phrase itself, the prepositional phrase itself stands as an idea. And the comma again is used as what, as a linking device, linking all of these elements as and presenting it as one single composite. So she uses commas to join together phrases in which one word performs different grammatical functions. Now, if you look at this, a transfer, a large transfer, a large transfer, a little transfer, some transfer, clouds and tracks do transfer. A transfer is not to be neglected. Now, how do we look at this? The word transfer. I'll repeat this, a transfer, a large transfer. We can also look into it alongside. A transfer, a large transfer, a little transfer, some transfer, clouds and tracks do transfer, a transfer that is not to be neglected. Now, the word transfer acts as an independent but variously modified noun, a verb and a noun occupying subject position in the complete sentence. So each phrase, except for the last one, ends with transfer. So this creates a chant-like rhythm and rhyme scheme within the sentence. If you look at the other one, the phrases here, how do they suggest, sugar, sugar, any sugar, anger, every anger, lover, sermon lover, center, no distractor, all order is in a measure. Sugar, any sugar, anger, every anger, lover, sermon lover, center, no distractor, all order is in a measure. Now, how do we look at it? So so here, the phrases here display a symmetry of composition, semantically and syllabically. How do we look at this? So each phrase in the sentence contains 3 disyllabic words except for the last 2. The pattern of repetition in the first 3 phrases is broken in the last and the fourth phrases, and the third word pattern of the first 4 phrases is broken in the last. In the succession of the phrases, a pattern is set up and gradually discarded. So Stein uses this device of juxtaposing similarity and differences throughout in this poetic collection. She uses commas to link phrases in patterns of symmetry and variation that create rhythm within each sentence. And her sentences are visually delimited by the initial uppercase letters and terminal periods, but they do not conform to the syntactic conventions or to the conventions of punctuation. So we see here that each sentence is comprised of a collection of syntactically discrete phrases which are related through the devices of repetition and symmetry. The comma in the tender buttons is a signifier of a pause or break as well as a linking device. The comma separates the phrases that a sentence comprises and joins phrases to create sentences that are units of rhythm rather than units of syntactic or logical cohesion. So Stein criticizes the convention. So by doing so, by experimenting with the form and the words, what is she doing? She criticizes, she challenges the conventions of punctuation and abandons the normative use of punctuation marks, especially the comma. She uses the comma to create rhythm within her sentences and to explore the devices of repetition and symmetry within the sentence. So Marjorie Perloff, a critique of Stein, she characterizes her style in terms of its resistance to closure as well as its syntactic and semantic displacement. Repetition, variation, permutation, the minuscule transfer of a given word from one syntactic slot to another, one part of speech to another, creates a compositional field that remains in constant motion. So there's more circularity, there's more motion. that prevents closure. So there's not a beginning and an end. It's to begin again and again. That prevents closure from taking place. Now, Quatermain also frames the body of Stein's work as a resistance to convention and tradition. Her strategy in writing of taking language further and further away from customary and paraphrasable referentiality from its lexical and denotative functions derives like a strategy of dissolving conventional linguistic and literary boundaries and genre from a profound and persistent opposition to the authoritative and authoritarian dominance of English modes, from her opposition to Anglo-centric literary standards, conventions, and procedures, which in poems like patriarchal poetry, she identifies as patriarchal and indeed elitist. So if you look at the poetic piece and otherwise also, her most of her writings, so there's a breaking down of the syntax, and the typical sentence structure is made short. It's choppy. The phrases, it has choppy phrases. It often omits verbs or subjects to disrupt the natural flow of language. There's a lot of repetition throughout the poem, throughout the pieces, throughout her writing. We'll see it in the tutorial as well, which creates a rhythmic pattern that emphasizes the object being described rather than narrative progression. And there's an unusual adjective use. So there's an unexpected adjectives to describe the common objects, forcing the reader to reevaluate. So we just saw the example of that, dress or the other, that we took, forcing the reader to re-evaluate their perception of the item. And further, she focuses on the sensory details, which often evoke a sense of touch, taste, or sight through the language use. So when we look at this poem, Eating, Stein pulls out the tension between separate, irreplaceable singularity and machine-like repeatability. It is difficult to distinguish based on sound the actual concept being mentioned. Eating, eating, a grand old man said roof, and never, never, resolvable burst. Is it so a noise to be? Is it a least remain to rest? Is it a so old say to be? Is it a leading our being? Is it so? 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 Eating, he eating, eating, he heat eating, he heat it eating, he heat eating, he heat eating. So she puts forth, so she restricts, the she controls the readers as well. She controls. So she does not, the text does not allow the reader, to move beyond that. So it's like, being stuck in the pattern. Here's a deliberate play between the sound and concept, and really it's like a tongue twister even. So if you have to just try it again, eating, a grand old man said roof, and never, never, resolvable burst. Is it so a noise to be? Is it a least remain to rest? Is it a so old say to be? Is it a leading our being? Is it so? 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 Eating, he heat eating, he heat it eating, he heat it, heat eating, he heat eating. So we see the deliberate play between the sound and concept, the tutter sound. Stein plays with eating as eating, further complicating it with eating, he, heat, it, eating. The word singularity, eating, is disrupted and fragmented. Eat and heat become blurred. The proximity brings out the tension between the concepts similar in sound but different in meaning. For a moment, it uh, arouses, arbitrariness. So peeks through the conceptual singularity of these words. So we can further look at how this decentering of language is visible in her writing. After a while, I murmured to Picasso that I liked his portrait of Gertrude Stein. Yes, he said. Everybody says that she does not look like it, but that does not make any difference. She will, he said. It is nice that nobody writes as they talk and that the printed language is different from the spoken otherwise. You could not lose yourself in books and of course, you completely do. To be regularly gay was to do every day the gay thing that they did every day. To be regularly gay was to end every day at the same time after they had been regularly gay. They were regularly gay, they were gay every day. They ended every day in the same way at the same time. They had been every day regularly gay. So there is so much of the the repetition which creates a kind of pattern, a rhythm. You will write it if you will write without thinking of the result in terms of a result, but think of the writing in terms of discovery, which is to say that creation must take place between the pen and the paper, not before in a thought or afterwards in a recasting. It will come if it is there and if you will let it come. You look ridiculous if you dance. You look ridiculous if you don't dance. So you might as well dance. There ain't no answer. There ain't gonna be any answer. There never has been an answer. There's your answer. Now, repetition and its implications. So we see the repetition of words, every appearance implies a different manner of understanding. And repetition has a disruptive function. Repetition is used strategically in her writings to inject a deeper meaning and more expansive significance to her words. Now, if you look at the emphasis of exploration of musicality, there's also, we have the Victorian writer, there was so much of Tennyson, Alfred Lord Tennyson, known for his musicality in his poetry. So emphasis of exploration of musicality, who would, deny this thought of, whether there isn't any musicality, if there is any, if there's no musicality in Gertrude Stein's, writing. Emphasis is on the exploration of the musicality of words as opposed to coherence. So of course, it doesn't the way the words are, woven, the way the words are woven, and here it becomes essential. I'm using, and perhaps in my next, presentation, I'm going to elaborate on this idea of weaving, how she weaves. So it's like knitting, weaving, carefully, thoughtfully, like putting them together, shaping it, nurturing it. And in the beginning, we did make a mention of writing in white ink. So how this nurturing happens through her and how the patterns get created in a cubist form. In her in her refusal to follow the grammatical rules and write coherent structured sentences lies her emphasis on exploring musicality of words composed together as opposed to the focus on forming coherent sentences. However, the desire to form a logical sentence restricts the writer to using melodies that have already been written. When these restrictions are removed, the writer is free to conduct symphonies that have never before been heard. So Stein's refusal to adhere to conventional grammar and syntax was a way of questioning linguistic structures and how they shape reality. She was a precursor to the post-structuralist thought, anticipating ideas about the instability of meaning, which was later explored by Derrida and Roulabard. Stein pushed modernism towards radical formal innovation, rejecting the traditional grammar, syntax, and narrative structure, repetition and disruption of syntax. Stein's writing mimics the continuous flow of thought influenced by his studies with William James as well. So, works like Tender Buttons challenge meaning by breaking the conventional sentence structures. A carafe, again, another one, the first one under the objects. A carafe, that is a blind glass, a kind in glass, and a cousin, a spectacle, and nothing strange. Now, meaning is not fixed but fluid and associative, mirroring the Cubist idea of fragmented perception. And if we look at the narrative experimentation in Stein, we can the best example is the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, where she blurs the autobiography and fiction, playing with the authorial identity. And Stein was greatly influenced by the Cubist and the abstract, and a prose mimics the disjointed overlapping perspectives of the Cubist paintings. Meaning emerges through patterns and rhythms rather than logic. And she was, and later, Samuel Beckett and the others, got inspired by her writing style. Now, repetition and rhythm. Certain words and phrases are repeated throughout the poem, throughout the collection, I would say, creating a hypnotic effect and emphasizing the object's physical presence. Sentences often lack traditional subject verb agreement and follow unusual word order, disrupting the expected flow of language. So there's a focus on texture and sensation. Stein describes objects through their physical qualities like color, texture, and shape, rather than their function or meaning. And there's a lack of clear narrative. So it's not telling a story or it's not presenting a clear progression of ideas, but it's being in the moment, it's talking about something. And then, living it out again in suspension, or maybe, again trying to begin from where it had started. A chair is a chair, a chair is a chair. So repetition emphasizes the object's simple form. The change of color is likely and a very little difference is prepared. So here we have the unconventional syntax and focus on the minute detail. If lilies are lily white, if they exhaust noise and distance and even dust, if they dust will dirt a surface that has no extreme grace. So it's a complex sentence structure which focuses on the physical qualities of a flower. Now, if you look at Stein's, style, there's more of like there's a suspension of time, and there's more of being in the time present. So the composition and creation to the socio-cultural time, it is created, this is the collective unconscious of a culture, is what Stein means when she uses the term composition. To understand its composition is to be able to explain a culture, and the artist's function is to express the composition of his time. So the difference between time of the composition and the time in the composition is more towards, how the composition is created. Now, present is a writing in continuous present. So present as a continuous plane of ongoingness, which unifies people living at the same time. And at its core, there's a continuous present. There's a visualization of time as fluid and all encompassing. So Cubism and its relation to Stein's idea of the continuous present was such that, as Pablo Picasso wrote in his 1923 statement to Maurice Jayas, to me, there is no past or future in art. If a work cannot live always in the present, and I emphasize this, cannot always live in the present, it must not be considered at all, thus stressing his belief in the timelessness of any artistic style. So composition in the continuous present as an instance of discourse in process rather than the completed product. So there's a recursive pattern versus the linear temporality. So beginning again and again versus beginning, middle, and end. It is believed that the linear time did not accurately represent or reflect our experience of the world, It strived to create a style of writing that was more present. Beginning again and again is Stein's process of writing, continuously starting over, which requires a practice of recursive writing and living. It removes itself from the tradition. Perhaps did women have a tradition of their own? So we can have a discussion on this as well. While still remaining in dialogue with it, allows us to approach histories in a new manner. Beginning again and again replaces essences with similarities. It presents things that are always the same, but always different. It is continually intervening by grafting onto the begun discourse new beginnings. So Stein, if you look at now, when we look at Stein and how did she set a legacy, a feminist legacy. So Stein paved the way for women to discover their own literary voices, and there were so many, contemporaries or her own contemporaries who were influenced by her. So Natalie Clifford Barney was a writer and well-known personality in the Parisian intellectual circles who was impacted by Stein's feminist and literary theories. Stein helped create an intellectual atmosphere that is reflected in Barney's writing, which examined issues of women's autonomy and same sex love. And again, Virginia Woolf was influenced by Stein's experimental writing. Woolf recognized a form of artistic and intellectual independence in Stein, who was also experimenting with the stream of consciousness tales. Woolf's own attempts in books like Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse might have been impacted by Stein's defiance of the conventional narrative standards. Again, Sylvia Plath was highly influenced, and Stein's unrepentant defiance of literary norms and a reluctance to adhere to gender norms won Plath's admiration. Some of the stark, fractured elements of Stein's prose are also present in Plath's writing, particularly in her poetry. Plath was more interested in emotional depth and inner psychology, but Stein's writing surely served as a template for daring form for producing daring forms of writing. Now, Duna Barnes was also influenced by Stein and uses fragmentation, abstraction, and nonlinear storytelling in Knightwood. Now, there's another angle to her writing, and how do we approach her writing? So, Tender Buttons as a queer text. Now, how does she queer language? Queering language through nonsense and repetition. So, nonsense, queer subject, which makes human subjects making sense, and the subjects that do not make sense. How do we look at the subjects? So, queering language through nonsense and repetition. So, Stein disrupts traditional syntax and word order, creating a sense of fluidity and play that resists clear categorization. So, language, like gender, language itself cannot be put into strict, frames as such. So, she experiments with that fluidity and resists clear categorization. A carafe, that is a blind glass, a kind in glass, and a cousin, a spectacle, and nothing strange. Now, this passage denies fixed meaning, unsettling the reader's expectations of clarity. This mirrors how queerness disrupts stable gender identities, embracing multiplicity instead. In again, we see a passage now from the Tender Buttons where there's a sensual coded reference to the lesbian desire, and it goes like this: a shining breakfast, a breakfast shining, no dispute, no practice, nothing at all. The repetition and the circulatory of phrases mimic intimate, private, and coded exchanges between lovers. Stein and her life partner, Alice Toklas, were together when she wrote Tender Buttons, and the work can be read as a private love language between the two. Stein queers both language and meaning, offering non traditional representations of gender, identity, and perception. Through its radical syntax, repetition, and fragmentation, Stein challenges heteronormative structures of language and presents a destabilized, fluid mode of expression that resists fixed identities. Now, language itself has historically been structured in gendered ways. There are certain words, objects, styles of writing which have been feminized or masculinized. Stein's text refuses to conform to these binaries. So she rejects the gendered grammar and logic. A little called anything shows shudders. Come and say what prints all day. A hole is inside a messenger. A dog makes an answer. The subject object relationship breaks here. So there's no he, there's no she. It's clearly no, it's not identifiable, and it makes the gender unstable, and fluid. The text enacts a queering of logic itself, removing fixed categories. Now, queer domesticity in rooms. So we also see it in the piece rooms. A little lift means a great deal. A little means a great deal. A closet means the most. So she subverts heteronormative domesticity, which is a space historically associated with the nuclear family and gendered labor. The closet can be read as a metaphor for queer secrecy, and coded existence. The home is not a traditional gendered space, but one of the ambiguous and shifting relationships. So, when we look at Stein's experiment, she foreshadows the post structuralist and the queer theorists like Eve Sedgwick and Judith Butler, who went on to contend that language both constructs and dismantles reality. Queer meaning exists in the spaces between words and in the unsaid. Gender is a performance rather than an essence. Gender button queers both language and perception, resisting gender binaries and normative meaning making. The work is a lesbian coded text where linguistic playfulness becomes an act of defiance against patriarchal structures. The critical reception of Gertrude Stein's writing. Now, what are these? De Koven, uh, there's a contention among Stein's critics about evaluation of her works and about what she was doing or what is most important in her work. Although her opinions were coveted by the great thinkers of her time, Stein's abstract poetic style has had a polarizing effect on those who encounter her work. B.L. Reid summarized early criticism of Stein's writings. Her unconventional use of language leaves it with no use value. No use value. In his critique entitled Art by Subtraction, a descending a dissenting opinion of Gertrude Stein, Reid finds most of Stein's writing to be unreadable and of no intellectual value or appeal. Similarly, Michael Gold in his article Gertrude Stein, A Literary Idiot, echoes Reid's claims and argues that her works read like the literature of the students of padded cells in Matthew 1, further stressing the insanity of Stein's prose. Positive criticism, Stein's manipulation of her syntax, while seemingly random and senseless, is actually a calculated strategy enacted to shape up the reader's preconceived notions of the subject. Eyeglasses become a color in shaving. A saloon is well placed in the center of an alley, rather than two clear glass lenses in metal frames. So, this conscious action of portraying glasses without the expected combination of words forces the reader to see the subject in a new light. Now, Mariana Dekoven's book, A Different Language, Gertrude Stein's experimental writing, also calls her experimental writing in that it disrupts the linear, orderly, closed, hierarchical, sensible, coherent, referential, and heavily focuses on the signified language and provides an alternative modes of signification, incoherent, open-ended, anarchic, irreducibly multiple. Um, there's a critic who writes about Stein's work thus. After 100 lines of this portrait of Mabel Dodge, I wish to scream, I wish to burn the book, I'm in agony, someone has applied an egg beater to my brain. So this appeared in Atlantic Review, flat prose, which is characteristic of Stein's writings, which makes it incomprehensible to conventional critics. So there's disruption of grammatical and syntactical structures, refusal to follow the conventional punctuation patterns, and adjective noun correspondences. What has Stein to say about her writing? I think one is naturally impressed by anything having a beginning, a middle, and an ending. When one is beginning writing, that is a natural thing because when one is emerging from adolescence, which is really, and when one is emerging from adolescence, here comes in the question of a writer who does not fall into a literary tradition and has to emerge from adolescence, does not have anything, to go back in the past, to look into the past, and has to begin, emerge, which is really when one first begins writing, one feels that not one would not have been one emerging from adolescence if there had not been a beginning and a middle and an ending to anything. Now, Gertrude Stein and T.S. Eliot. So, as I said in the beginning, both of them, both of them were contemporaries. Of course, T.S. Eliot was a junior to Gertrude Stein, but both of them were somehow anxious about their creativity. They were anxious about becoming a poet, becoming a writer. They were anxious about being situated into a tradition. For Gertrude Stein, perhaps there was no tradition that she could look back into, but for T.S. Eliot, there was a tradition, and therefore he comes down in 1910, 11. He comes down to Paris, searching for a tradition. He gets, he becomes an English writer for, to find a lineage for himself. So if we look at the two writers and their struggle and how we look at these innovators. Approach to language. Gertrude Stein's approach to language is highly experimental, non referential, and disrupts syntax. T.S. Eliot, it's precise, elusive, deeply structured. If we look at the influences, psychology, she was highly influenced by psychology, cubism, and the abstract art. And T.S. Eliot deployed mythology, the classical literature, and religion. The key themes in the two were quite different. So perception. So when we look at, is there any difference between the writing patterns of a male writer and a female writer? If at all there is a difference, we see it here. Perception, identity, and everyday life. And over there in Eliot, we have civilization, fragmentation, existential crisis. In form, it's more nonlinear prose, repetition, rhythm based writing. But in Eliot, it's a collage of voices, mythic structures, and he gets a broad, mythic structure. So it's already available to him. So and then there's this poetic fragmentation, impact on modernism. She pushed the limits of prose and language, and it defined high modernist poetry. So when we look at the two phases of modernism, Stein deconstructed language itself, questioning how meaning is created, and Eliot restructured tradition using fragmented forms to reflect modern anxieties. Both challenged literary conventions, paving the way for modernism and redefining how literature represents reality in the 20th century. So these are the references. We can look at these